Okay. I feel that we are going to be a small group this morning because a number of women will be listening to the replay rather than attending live. But I'm actually quite excited about that because it gives us the opportunity to go really deep and sort of be a little bit more individuated and have time for deep sharing, which is what I was really hoping for this container. So we manifest what it is that what we're hoping to hold space for. So I'm really glad to see your faces. Thank you for joining me this morning. This is deep work, and it's a process of personal excavation. It's not really like me just sharing knowledge or information with you. It's not like an educational piece, although there is, that's part of it. It's really me holding space to take you on a personal journey. And the thing about this work is that it unfolds slowly over time. Like really what we're going to do over the next 2 days is create a foundation or sow some seeds from which you will then have the opportunity to reflect, come back to. Even just this morning, excuse me, as I was looking at my notes, more pieces, more threads, more pieces of the jigsaw puzzle kind of downloaded for me, and I pulled more bits together. So yeah, it all makes sense in its own beautiful way. And the job that we have over the next 2 hours and then tomorrow morning, is to stay curious and to stay open and to just really make ourselves available for this inquiry. Because there's this beautiful, beautiful teaching in the Bhagavad Gita, one of our great yogic sacred texts, that says, when you take one step towards Krishna, when you take one step towards the divine, Krishna takes 10 steps towards you. And I love this teaching because what it reminds us is we just have to be a little bit open, a little bit curious, a little bit available, and the floodgates will open. We will be blessed with so much awareness and so much insight because of making ourselves available in that way. And, the flip side to that is when we feel scared or nervous or, we want to shelter ourselves from what's really going on, and we kind of put the blinkers down and we close our eyes and we close our ears. And when this happens, then we really don't have the opportunity to be available. We're not available. We're just kind of in denial, or we're in not looking, And so what you have done by signing up to be here and engaging in this process, whether you're here live or you're watching the replay, is say to source, say to the divine, I am available. I am available for this inquiry. I'm curious. And woo-woo as it might sound, not just for yourself, but for the ancestors, the generations that came before, that may or may not have been able to be available for whatever reason, and for those ahead of us, our daughters, our sons, the generations, our grandchildren. So we sit here in the middle and we do this work for those that came before, for those that come ahead, and also for our sisters as we sit together side by side. So we sit in circle. We have, we're not doing this work alone. We're doing it in the context of a community. So that's a little bit of background. Today will be a fair bit of me sharing with you some of the kind of ideas and constructs around this work, and then some journaling, and then some sharing on your part. That's kind of our process for today. So if you don't have a pen and paper or something that you can journal, you'll definitely need that. I want to start with an acknowledgement, and also just using a couple of essential oils, which is completely optional, but the 2 oils that I've chosen for today are magnolia and lavender peace. The lavender peace contains vetiver, which is a very grounding oil. It's almost like maple syrup, like it's really of the earth. It smells like, I grew up in the countryside in the southeast of England. I grew up on a farm, but there was a lot of woodland near where I grew up. In fact, the very famous Winnie the Pooh stories, the 100-acre wood that A.A. Milne writes about in Winnie the Pooh is the woodland that I grew up in. So it's quite precious. And when it rains heavily, the woods in England have a particular fragrance, like an earthy, piney, just smells like the earth. And that's what vetiver reminds me of. So I chose this oil because it connects me to my ancestry, to my roots and my heritage, but also to the earth, which is really the foundation of these teachings. And then the other oil I've chosen is magnolia, which is known as the grandmother's oil. This is the oil that heals ancestral hurt. Magnolia is one of the most ancient plants in the world. In China, there are magnolia trees, supposedly, reputedly, that have been growing for thousands of years. And obviously one of the most beautiful flowers as well. And the interesting thing about magnolia, which I always observe every year because it's one of my favorites, is how quickly the flowers come and go. Like most of the year, it just looks like a fairly boring normal tree. But then, you know, for a few weeks, it blooms into this magnificent, radiant, just divine offering. And I'm sure there's some symbolism in there too. So if you want to join me with an oil, completely optional, completely up to you. As I said, for me, I'm focusing on vetiver and magnolia today. Place a couple of drops of oil in the palm of your hand. And rubbing the palms of the hands together. As we drop into a more ceremonial space, take a couple of deep inhalations. Really grounding into and experiencing fully that aroma. And allowing the teachings of that particular plant, whatever oil it is that you've chosen to work with today, to drop into your sensory awareness. Just experiencing that sense engagement. And then gently closing down the eyes. May we enter sacred space together in this moment. We acknowledge the traditional custodians, the traditional owners, the traditional inhabitants of the land that we sit on. For me, here in Sydney, Australia, that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. A group of peoples that spans back thousands and thousands of years, beyond time, beyond our comprehension. Holding within their bloodlines and their golden thread so much wisdom, so much knowledge. We acknowledge the teachers that come before us in all of our spiritual work, but particularly for today in this red thread work. I acknowledge Jane Hardwick Collins. I acknowledge Asia Sula, and I acknowledge Heather Bridge, all of whom have been great teachers to me in this work. And I ask Source that I may do a good job of continuing the transmission of these teachings to you. And we acknowledge, and we will be acknowledging repeatedly today, our ancestors, our cultural line, our heritage, our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, our sisters that sit side beside us in this work, each one of us in this container today, each one of us listening to this recording, and our sons, our daughters, our grandchildren. Also, the spirit soul of any babies that didn't come earthside, if there have been miscarriages, if there have been abortions, if there have been children who have passed. We acknowledge those spirit souls in this sacred space. And bring the palms of your hands together in front of your heart. Gently bow your head. Namaste. Okay, so although these teachings are very ancient, this particular way of working with them and thinking about them is I would say, an evolving piece of work. I feel that for my teachers, particularly Jane Hardwick Collins, who's been very formative in this work for me, and then for myself as well, this is like an evolving or an emerging body of work. So it sort of treads the path between that which is truly ancient and that which is a new paradigm or a new blueprint. And the beautiful thing about that is that you get to be part of the emergence of this way of working. So your contribution and your reflections and your curiosity is absolutely as valid as anyone else's in this space. There's no expert and student. There's no teacher student here. There's just literally the guidance and the kind of questioning and the curiosity and the investigation. So I would love for you to feel like today's session is very much very open and expanded and without agenda, and just allow yourself to be in that space, and also to notice stories and connections that arise that you haven't thought of before, because we've all got narratives that we've run many times, right? We've all got stories about, you know, our childhood or our parents or relationships or children that are old stories that we've held a long time, or stories that have become part of who we are. And often they'll be familial stories, like the things that your mother has told you or your grandmother has told you, that have been formative in your identity of yourself. But sometimes, often, there are stories behind the stories. And that's what we're really interested in today. We're interested in going even a little bit deeper beyond the sort of obvious narratives. And I feel like this is one of the differences between red thread work and therapy, like traditional therapy. So there's a beautiful place for traditional therapy. I'm certainly not saying that therapy isn't important. I think it very much is. Therapy works in the arena of the mind and logic and logos, well, like what we might call the masculine. You know, the pieces go together like in a linear order. It could be something very simple like I felt abandoned as a child, therefore as an adult I often push people away so that I won't have the experience of feeling abandoned as an adult, right? So there's like a very logical, linear kind of explanation for our behaviors. And like I said, there's a really potent and important part where that place, where that process is very helpful. However, with the red thread work, we're much more in what's known as the eros, or the feminine. And the feminine pathway isn't linear. It doesn't go because X happened, then Y happened, and then Z happened. It weaves and flows and goes up and down. It takes the long scenic route. It gets lost and tapers off. You have to reclaim it and call it back in. Like it's not one pathway. And, you know, when I chose to call this training pathway, I was really thinking about the winding pathway, the weaving pathway. Those of you who are familiar with Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which is a scripture I teach on a lot, will know that the word sutra means thread. And another element of the threads of the teachings is the chapters of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, which are called pada, and they mean footsteps. The word pada means footsteps. So it's like with each step in this work, we are unfolding a little more. We're going a little deeper into the forest. And, you know, I love the old fashioned fairy tales like Hans Christian Andersen and all those kind of old, somewhat dark fairy tales. If you've read Women Who Run with the Wolves, you'll know what I'm talking about. And as a child, I loved those stories. And you know, some of them are really quite frightening. Like reading them now to my kids, I'm like, God, I don't remember these being quite as dark as they are, but they are. And so, for example, the story of Little Red Riding Hood or the story of Hansel and Gretel, they go into the forest alone without an adult. They get lost. They try to leave, you know, a breadcrumb trail or a little trail of something, but the birds eat the trail and then they can't figure out where they are. And this is all metaphor for our journey into healing. Like we set out with great intention, with, you know, food in our backpacks and water and a plan of how to get back home and a map of where we want to be. And then at some point we get into the forest and things start to get a little bit dark and we realize that we're on our own and we've lost our companion and the breadcrumbs have disappeared and the food has run out and we can't start a fire. And in Christianity, this is often called the dark night of the soul. In, you know, a lot of addiction circles, they call it rock bottom. Like it's the place that you reach where you're just lost and in the darkness, right? And we've all had moments of that in our lives. Sometimes those moments can be quite extended and sometimes they're very brief. And I don't know if you ever have this experience, and this might sound really morbid and I don't mean it to at all, but in my life, particularly the more I am engaged in spiritual practices, like the deeper I go and the older I get, I have moments in my ordinary day, like my very much just mundane day-to-day existence, of overwhelming joy and gratitude, where I just feel so grateful for my children, grateful for my life, grateful for my privilege. You know, just the simplest thing like a cup of coffee or a sunset or something is just like overwhelmingly beautiful and wonderful. And I also have moments of overwhelming sadness and almost desolation when I look at the world and I look at my children and I think, what world are they growing up in? What's happening? Like, why are there so many wars and so much suffering? And why are people so toxic, and the environment and all of it? And those moments kind of surface and drop away against the backdrop of everything else that's going on, which is just mundane and ordinary. And so in this red thread work, in this pathway work, as we parda, as we footstep through, like Hansel and Gretel going into the forest or Little Red Riding Hood, there will be great moments of darkness and overwhelm and loss and pain. And there will also be these moments of great joy, and like the sunlight comes through the trees and it doesn't matter that you're lost. You're just here in the moment and everything is beautiful and it's all okay. And I think one of the signs, I mean, I truly believe this, one of the signs of real spiritual maturity is being able to hold both, being able to acknowledge and notice that we all are so mixed. You know, we're such mixed, but like we're just a mixture of so many things. And when we polarize, and we particularly do this with other people, that's a sign of lack of maturity in our spiritual practice. You know, I was talking to my partner about this the other day because we were talking about his ex, the mother of his children. And I should just preface this by saying this is very much a closed circle that we're in right now. Like the replay will be showed to other people who signed up for Pathway, but this will never be a public. What we're sharing now will never be shared publicly. So just please know that this is a closed container before I share my very personal stories, and probably you will share yours. Anyway, we were talking about his ex-partner, and she has done some pretty horrible things to him. She's told a lot of lies about him and been pretty toxic and kept his children from him, and, you know, been really not a pleasant human. And there's been a lot of anger around that and upset. And I've certainly had my fair share of, you know, being upset with her and angry with her as well. But we were talking about her, and he said, you know, I feel all this like resentment and anger and frustration with her. And at the same time, I still feel so much love for her. And I remember what it was like when we first got together. And I know that she has so much goodness within her and she's a good mum. And like, he really just articulated, honestly, and this sounds very basic to say it, but being able to really hate someone and really love them at the same time. And that in itself, again, it's a spiritual maturity. Right? I mean, actually, it doesn't need to be an ex-partner. If you have a current partner, you know what I'm talking about, right? Everyone smiling. Like, we have these moments of profound gratitude, profound love, profound connection. And then the next minute, you know, it's really, really tough. It's really hard. And so being able to step a little step beyond that and say, okay, this is a moment of darkness, this is a moment of light, this is a moment of pain and hatred, this is a moment of love, and hold space for all of it. That's really what I think a lot of the scriptures have been pointing to, and really what the essence of spiritual maturity is. And as we go into this red thread work, I want to invite you to be available for both, even within the same story, right? Like even within the same person, even within yourself, that all of it can exist at once. Excuse me. So we'll think about this journey as the journey of laying down the breadcrumbs as we try to kind of move closer to understanding of our history and our emerging future. And we can also think of it, and this is an analogy that Jane uses a lot, which I find very helpful, as a jigsaw puzzle. Like right now, we have all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle laid out on the table in front of us, and we have a quiet, solitary space to sit in over the next 2 hours today and 2 hours tomorrow. We're going to place the jigsaw puzzle together, and we're going to see if we can make a picture. And at the end of it, we might have a very coherent image that really lands and kind of makes sense. Or we might have some pieces, some patches, you know, when you do a jigsaw and you've got like bits that still aren't quite connected. So it might be like that. And it might be that over the next few weeks, months, honestly, years, that the whole jigsaw puzzle starts to emerge. I mean, one of the things that Jane has said to me, and I take this as a really beautiful teaching, is that as we move into the crone phase or the elder phase, which means, you know, sort of well beyond menopause, we start to really see the picture of the jigsaw puzzle if we are in our healed experience of self, right? If we've done the work, in other words, it starts to become a little clearer. And then I look at, you know, there are examples. So, for example, if I look at my teacher, Sharon Gannon, who's in her 70s, funnily enough, 3 women in my life who are like probably the most significant 3 women are my 2 teachers, Sharon Gannon, who's the founder of Jivamukti Yoga, Maya Tiwari, who's the founder of the Wise Earth School of Ayurveda, and my mother, of course. And they're all exactly the same age. They were born in the same year. I think they're, I've lost track now, but like 73 or 74 this year. And I love my mother. I'm not, this isn't to sort of, you know, badmouth anyone. But when I look at Sharon or I look at Maya Tiwari, I see women who are in their elder years now, well past menopause, who have a relaxed comfort in themselves and a reconciliation around all the events of their lives. And they're both women who've been through a lot of trauma and very colorful lives. It's not that they've lived in great privilege forever. You know, both of them, all kinds of journeys of loss and pain and hardship, like unbelievable, actually. Recently, Sharon has been sharing with me more personally some of her own stories. And it's just incredible to me, the stuff that she has been through and the radiant spiritual being that she is, even in the face of that adversity. And then I look at my mother, who is, and again, I mean this with great love, someone who doesn't want to look, doesn't want to do the work, lives in fear, has huge amounts of anxiety. I mean, one of the things she said to me on a recent visit that she had to Australia, very recently she came, she said, I just don't believe in forgiveness. I think if someone's done something wrong, they need to live with the consequences of that forever. Like that's a hardened, calcified, unmalleable way of looking at the world. And that's what can happen in old age if we don't do this work, right? We get older, and we all know old people like this, and they become literally calcified, hardened, shut down. You can see it in their bodies, the physical calcification, you know? This is the opposite of placing the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together. This is like literally taking them and just throwing away and going, oh, it was all rubbish. It's hard. It's difficult. Life sucks. Bad things have happened to me, like a child throwing toys out of the pram, you know, where the wise elder in a holy practice, a holy process, brings the pieces together. And I also think, and this is a little bit off topic, but I've been pondering this, so I thought I'd bring it in just very briefly. Mostly because I've started to see grey hairs coming through. I'm 45 and I'm just starting to get grey hairs now. And I'm in this conversation with myself about whether or not I'm going to dye my hair. I've never dyed my hair, so it would be the first time to hide the grey. And I feel like there is something around this calcification and closing down as we get older that also has to do with denying the signs of aging, and, you know, lots of procedures and processes to keep ourselves looking young. And that when we, certainly if I look at my Tawaria, I look at Sharon Gannon, my two teachers, neither of them do very much to make themselves look younger. Like, there's no Botox, there's no hair dye, they're just gracefully, beautifully aging. And when we allow ourselves to do that, when we allow ourselves to naturally age, I'm not sure, this is still a thread I'm kind of figuring out, but I feel intuitively that there's something in that also that has a connection to the claiming of the truth of the jigsaw puzzle coming together. Like, it's part of being older. You can't really do this work in your, you know, teens or your early 20s. Like, the real reclaiming, the real patterning stuff starts late 30s, early 40s, I think, at the very earliest. Now, that doesn't mean, for those who are younger watching this, and I know there are women who will be watching the replay who are pregnant or going to be pregnant, so you are younger, that doesn't mean that you can't start early. Like, begin as soon as you can, because if you have better birthing experiences, if you have a better experience of birthing your baby that breaks some generational ties that are toxic and heals some ancestral wounds or some ancestral hurt, then you create a lineage that's so much easier later on, you know? It's always the right time to begin this work. And for those of us who have daughters or young granddaughters, we can be doing this work with them from right now. From, you know, I'm already thinking about red thread with my 2-year-old. Okay, so I hope that all might sound a little bit abstract, and I'm going to go into giving some actual very practical, concrete examples in a moment. But before I do, does anyone want to share anything? Like, what has come up? What are you feeling? What is it? Yeah, what's bubbling away? I'd love to hear from you. Sarah.
Hi, sorry, my daughter's just walked up as I've said I want to share. Yeah, I'm feeling such deep emotion rising. I've felt it these past few days, actually. There's so many. There's already been curiosity. I love that word, curiosity. That's a word that sort of came to me in my 30s at the start of my reclaiming and healing journey, and there's a lot of that coming through at the moment. But there's also a lot of reflection that when you were speaking about the Western therapies and on reflection now, just literally now in this space, that's been my journey from having clinical psychology support through my pregnancy and after, back in 2014, 2015, 2016. He took me into the depths of awareness towards my mother and my father and my whole family that shifted my entire perspective. And I feel since 2014, it's like I've been doing this, looking for that practitioner or that pathway to go into this more, and I've not ever been able to. It's not that I haven't been able to find it, because it's obviously been excavating. I love that word too, taking away so much and clearing so much. That's what I've been doing literally for years now. But everything you're speaking to about the red thread is just, it's just landing. Like I feel like I've got this holding around me going, it's time. And I'm not scared, and I didn't think I was scared. But on reflection, I clearly had to do all that excavating and all the work I've been doing over the years to create the space for myself inside. And the awareness, I'm so curious to, I watched your video last night. I'd planned to the other night, but things popped up for a reason, obviously. There's not much I know about my mother's birth and my birth and things like that. So, but I'm very curious to learn more. And I don't know, there's this thread. It's like I feel a connection's going to come. It's like because I have been holding on to a lot of resentment and a lot of anger towards my mother, and even through other energy mentors and medical intuitives and guides and energy workers and healers, they've always led me to my mother and to connect with her, but there's never been I've never had what came through for me last night. I've never known what to ask. I've never known what to, like, things like write a letter to your mother. But, you know, I've written a letter to my mother. I haven't given it to her because it just felt too surface. But yeah, all of a sudden the questions are here. So it's almost like it's time to cross over. And actually, interestingly, before I even delved into understanding what this journey was going to be like, I wrote my mother a text message last week, just with all these questions. There was about 6 questions around my birth. And typically, you know, which doesn't surprise me, she hasn't responded. But coincidentally, my mother is coming over tonight for a sleepover, and that never happens. And it's happened organically. And I don't know, maybe I'm creating a space this morning to have with her this afternoon, this evening as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. One thing I want to pick up on what you said there, and there's lots of different pieces there, but one thing that I think is really resonant is part of the red thread work has to do with the transition from looking outside of ourselves for answers to looking inside. So, and again, you know, there's a great role for support and for practitioners and for external help. Like, I'm not in any way saying that's not helpful. I've done a bunch of it in my life. I'm sure I will continue to. But actually, the depths of this work, like the real guts of it, you have to do it alone. You can't, there's no person that you can go and see. There's no therapist. There's no modality. There's no inspiring quote. There's nothing that is going to take you into this other than you and your own time and space. And literally, I mean, honestly, the way that I do this work, it might sound really simple, overly simple, but it's the truth, is I take time, often when my daughter's sleeping, if I've got time, because I have such rare moments in my home where there's no one else around. And I lie on my bed. Sometimes I put an eye pillow on, no music, nothing, no, maybe a bit of essential oil, but something in the diffuser. And I just think about these things. Like, I literally just think about the stories and the threads and, you know, imagine my family's history and what I want my daughter's future to look like and my son's. And then I journal, and I might, you know, I get little downloads, little ideas, and I just start to write them out. You know, eye mask comes off, write a few little lines, go back into the zone, contemplate. And some days it's so rich and I have so much, almost like a channel, like it's just coming through. And other days, not much. I'm like, okay, there's not, you know, I'm not really accessing. I'm thinking more about what I'm going to make for dinner, or, you know, like much more trivial things. So, you know, I think we're very good at, many of us in this space, outsourcing our healing. You know, we want someone else to do it for us, or at least take us there. And that's beautiful to an extent. And then there's a point at which it's actually just, we just have to quietly, like the saints and the sages in the yoga tradition that just went into the caves, went into the jungles, went into the high Himalayas and just sat in meditation, you know, and just sat with themselves and did the journey. There's nothing more than that, really. And, you know, the really practical good thing about that is it doesn't cost any money. You don't have to go anywhere. So you can do this work at home on your own every day if you feel so inspired. It's really very beautiful. Anyone else want to share at this point? Trudy.
I just kind of wanted to share. It's been amazing because, like, I work with many women and hold space, And when we did the Reclaiming Birth Summit on Friday and you did your sharing, it was like everything just dropped in with what has always kind of like been in my heart, if that makes sense. And I ended up discovering, because I rang my sister after, I said, do you know like much about mum's birth? And she said, no, I don't really. And to the point where we're sort of like, don't even know where she was born. And she shared with me, I said, do you remember anything about mine? And she said, yeah. She said, I just remember going, my mum actually had a C-section for me. And I always thought I was born naturally. So C-section, and then she had a hysterectomy as well, because realistically shouldn't have had me. And yeah, and then I had 3 C-sections. And so it was kind of very eye-opening and heart-opening. Yeah, so really, really looking forward to dropping into the work. And yeah, and with the, when you're sharing about the darkness and, you know, the journey and things, it's like, I have this saying, it's like the valley of death, you know. You go into the valley of death and I always come out with another part of me. So where it used to be very scary, I actually now get this kind of like excitedness about what I'm going to discover about myself when I come out the other side. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Emma, did you want to share?
Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm feeling quite a lot of emotion around it as well. And like a story in my lineage that's really, yeah, just really present in my mind right now that I wasn't really, like I kind of came to this in a bit of a rush, family stuff. So I kind of wasn't expecting to bring anything like big to it. But I'm thinking of a story in my lineage where my maternal grandmother died when I was a child of breast cancer, and it was never like spoken about a huge amount. I was quite young. My mom, yeah, doesn't really talk about it. And then maybe 5-10 years ago, she revealed that in her mind, in my mom's mind, her mom got sick because of the stress of my granddad being unfaithful towards her and just everything that kind of came from there. So yeah, it's interesting, like how that kind of shapes how I view my mom and her grandmother and my granddad. And yeah, you know, that these emotional traumas can, you know, possibly lead to such sickness. And then really interesting, and yeah, this is my personal thing, which is playing out right now, is my partner was unfaithful about a year ago, and I can kind of feel myself like, ooh, am I gonna choose that path or choose a different one?
So huge. We get offered these opportunities to like repattern the same way. We're going to go into this more tomorrow actually, or do it differently. And yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like, I mean, yeah, I'll leave it there because there's so many stories I could say about that. We'll go into that more tomorrow. But yeah, life will present us again and again and again with the opportunity to keep reinforcing the ancestral patterning, or to say it ends with me and I'm doing it differently. And sometimes externally that might not look even very different. You know, it might be that you know, that you're, I mean, just to give an example, that your mother or your grandmother stayed with your grandfather and that you stay with your husband, or it might be that your grandmother left your grandfather or that you leave your husband. The same thing might happen, but it's how you're processing that internally. Are you living with resentment and anger, and is it festering away, or have you let it go? Do you see all the sides? It's that spiritual maturity piece. It really is. And yeah, it's not easy. It's just not easy. And the other thing is, this work isn't easy. And also, our culture is not designed to support us in doing it. You know, we live in a consumerist culture that wants us to buy lots of things and distract ourselves. You know, go to this place, listen to this thing, buy this experience, have this nice car, house, dress, whatever it might be. Distract, phone, distract. It's not about let's go in deep and do this work. We just don't live in a culture that supports that. And so for us to be doing this work, we're actually deeply counterculture. Like, this is radically against the cultural narrative. Yeah, truly. Oh,
Meeting.
yeah, we can got you now.
If it's okay, I'd just like to share something with that. My mum died of breast cancer, and so did my nan, and ovarian cancer. And these journeys in my body have been quite present. And when my mum died and I had my daughter, I said, this is not what you pass on.
Mm-hmm.
And made that decision to change. Huge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. All right. I want to share with you 2 stories from my own experience, my own red thread stories, just to give you an idea about what red thread is and how it works. And then I'm going to guide you through a process where you're going to kind of start opening into understanding some of your red thread stories, which from the conversations we've already had, it sounds like you ladies are already in that journey and in that work. So it's going to be very easy for us to go into that portal and access. So the first story is actually about my ex-husband, and it's about his birth story. And I'm just sharing it with you because it's part of the red thread of my sons, because he is their father, and therefore my stories. And my mother-in-law, who obviously is a key figure in this story, was a very important person for me when I was pregnant and birthing my first 2 children. She was like a mother figure to me, and someone who I was very close to and really loved a lot. She's passed away now. She's no longer in her body. So we were living in my mother-in-law's home when I was pregnant, and she was very much the matriarch of that home, big Greek family. And then when I had the baby, we continued living there for a couple of years, and then back and forth. And when she was ill, we moved in and we cared for her, and the story went on. But I remember when I first came to that house being a little bit intimidated by her as a sort of homemaker and matriarch, because she was so all over it. Like, just everything was so well organized and beautiful and clean. And, you know, there was just always good food. And she was just an amazing homemaker. And when she passed away, I still don't really understand how this happened, but I inherited the role of becoming the matriarch of that house. And at some point, I was living there with my then husband and his brother and his father and our 4 sons. So it was 7 males and me in this home, and I had inherited her legacy. And the same altar was still on the wall, but she was Orthodox Christian, and I'd added a few of my little bits and pieces. And she always encouraged me to add my stuff because she loved the fact that I was interested in her spirituality. And I remember almost every day looking at that altar and just feeling like she was with me still in that process of stepping into the role of matriarch and mother and homemaker, and getting so much support from that. So that's one part of red thread. That's one little kind of story. The story of how she birthed my ex-husband, my children's father, is extraordinary and forms a part of her red thread journey, which I saw play out in her life. Which was that she had had several miscarriages before having him. He was like the golden last child. He came 10 years after her other children. And she desperately wanted another child. And it was kind of strange to everybody because she was a little bit older and she kept having miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage. Anyway, my ex-husband was born 2 months premature, which back then was really very preemie, because they didn't have he's 50 now, so they didn't have the same neonatal care at all. And when he was born, she just assumed it was another miscarriage, another stillbirth, because she'd had quite late miscarriages previously. And again, just imagining the trauma of that as I say those words, it's like that's a lot. So she said to the doctors, take him away, I don't want to see the baby, I'm sick of, basically, and she told me this story, I'm sick of seeing these dead babies, like I just don't want to see it, take it away. And so they took the baby, and they were trying, she was hysterical, like she was so emotional. They were trying to communicate to her the baby is alive, and she was like, he's going to die, I don't want to see it, I don't want to know, take it away, take it away. It took 3 days for her to calm down enough to acknowledge and engage with the fact that he was alive, and start mothering him and believing that he was going to live. And then the legacy of that was for the rest of his life, he was just completely spoiled, like absolutely every whim pandered to. And, you know, I inherited that from him as an adult, like this mother that had overcompensated because she had felt like she abandoned him or thought he was going to die. And she basically mothered him up until I married him with that energy of, I'll give you everything you possibly could ever want because I feel like you might die at any moment, you know, even though he's a strapping, big, large adult man. And so these red threads, you know, these stories that's part of the story of my marriage. And that's part of the story of my parenting my children, his children. And even now to this day, that red thread exists of what I would consider to be his entitlement and her overindulgent service, and what that showed up like in their lives, and then what that showed up like for him as a parent, for me as a mother, etc., etc., etc. So I'm sharing that with you purely as an example. It's one piece when I think of the whole jigsaw puzzle of my marriage, my grandparents, his mother, her role in my life, my own mother's lack of maternal support. Like I got a lot more from my mother-in-law than I did from my actual mother. All of these form part of the jigsaw that I'm still putting together. It's not fully formed yet. I want to share with you another story. And this one's not about birthing at all. This one's about money, but it's just so potent that I just want to share it with you because it's part of Red Thread, right? Our money stories are a big, big, big part of Red Thread. So today we're focusing on birthing, but we can also focus on our relationships, our marriages, our parenting style, and our money stories, and our work, the way that we do our work in the world. All of these things deeply ingrained in Red Thread. But this is a Red Thread money story. So my grandfather, and if you watched the replay or if you were there for the birth summit, Reclaiming Birth, you heard me tell the story about my mother being born in colonial India, right? And her parents were expats, very wealthy, living in Bombay back in the time of the Raj. Expats. And so my grandfather, who was my mother's father, his story is amazing. So he was born in the north of England to a very poor mining family. He had 13 siblings, and every single one of his brothers worked in the mines, digging out coal from the age of 13. So they went to school for like 4 or 5 years only, got pulled out of school at 13, went down into the mines, digging out coal, and living a very, very basic subsistence type of living, you know, like hand to mouth. You get paid on a Friday, the money has to last till the next Friday, and you eat bread and dripping, pretty much like bread and animal fat, like just the most basic kind of survival level experience of being human, and doing really hard, dirty, unpleasant physical labor that makes you sick because of all the coal dust. So anyway, my grandfather, who was one of these 13 boys, was set to go down the mines. But what they realized when he was at school is, oh, he's quite good at maths. He has a natural talent for maths. And so he was allowed to stay a little bit longer at school. And long story short, and it's a long story, I won't go into all the details, he ended up becoming an international stockbroker. He moved to India and set up a whole stockbroking company in colonial India and became a multimillionaire, and pulled his whole family out of poverty. He ended up buying his parents a bakery and a shop, and his brothers were able to leave the mines, and it's like a whole legacy story. And I've known this story for many years because my mother has told it to me, and it's a powerful story. But I'd never made the connection with my own journey around money. I'd never made that connection. So then what happened with my mother is that she had a lot of money, obviously, because I inherited from her parents. But my parents were always quite not very generous with my brother and I, because they had this real narrative running of, we need to find our own way. Like, you have to work hard for your money. We don't want to spoil you just because we've inherited money. Even though my mother actually, you know, had a lot of money her whole life. So I grew up with this real story of, you have to learn to work hard for your money, and, you know, you shouldn't be spoiled, right? And that red thread came through into a whole story I had around money can only be attained through real grit and determination and hard work, which is a story I'm still unfurling and untangling. But there's another narrative. If I look into my red thread, so that's the one I inherited from my mother, right? The obvious kind of therapized story. But when I really go deep into my red thread, what I see is my grandfather as an example of anything is possible. And the entrepreneurial spirit that I know I have within me, that is a drive to kind of build a legacy, is in my red thread from him. I mean, my goodness, the hardships he overcame, it's like an incredible story. You can't even make this stuff up. That's part of my lineage too, that anything's possible, that we can overcome great obstacles, and that we can reinvent ourselves. We can create new narratives. So both of these stories, the story of my ex-husband's birth and the story of my grandfather and his millions, are just to share with you, literally, they are pieces of my jigsaw puzzle. And as you build your red thread story, you'll have these stories, you'll have these moments, you'll have these pieces that will all start to fit together. And this is the karma, this is the web of who you are as a person. And as you start to, in some ways unpack, but in some ways put back together, it's kind of like a double process. These stories that you've been told, like I said at the very beginning, will reframe. You'll start to see them in different ways. So it's not just, oh, you have to work really hard for your money. The reframe is actually anything's possible, and we can create anything we can imagine. Okay. So with all of that said, we're going to start working into the pathway of your own red thread story. And those of you who are in the summit will already be familiar with this, but now's the journaling piece. So you want to grab your journal and your pen if you can. And we're going to start with, we could go back further, but we'll start here. We're going to start with the birth of your mother, how your grandmother birthed your mother. So anything you know about that, any recollections you have around that, any stories, time, place, circumstance of how your grandmother birthed your mother. And you might want to, and I find this extremely helpful, instead of just the events of the story, which is the linear, it's the masculine, you might want to imagine almost like it's a scene in a novel or a scene in a movie. And you can make up some elements of this if you don't know the details. You can let your imagination fill in the blanks. What was the feeling tone of that scene? Like if you were a director creating the movie scene of this birth, what did it smell like? What did it look like? What did it feel like? What kind of background was there? What kind of clothing was being worn? Who was present? What kinds of things did they say? What was the feeling tone behind what was said? So fill it out for us, flesh it out for us a little bit in the sense of the sensory experience rather than just the facts. And like I said, if you don't know, imagine yourself as a writer or a director of a movie and you can make it up. Because actually you're not really making it up, you're channeling into it. Okay. This is to be continued. So if we move through these a little quicker than, you know, you feel you need more time, you can come back to this, as I said, that beautiful contemplation of just that quiet space for yourself. This is all to be continued. So now let's move to how your mother birthed you. And in the same way, you've probably got more details about this in the grandmother story, but in the same way, can you drop into the feeling tone? Can you create the movie scene? Can you imagine what it would have felt like? What was going on for your mother emotionally, physically, energetically? Who was present? The colors, the smells, the sensations. The story of your birth. Okay. So now in this like montage scene of our experiences, and again, for most of you, probably feeling into the idea of a movie is the easiest because most of us are quite visual. I think a lot through words. So for me, I like writing is more visceral, but the movie idea works really well. I want you to imagine yourself and build the scene of yourself as a young girl. So way before puberty, way before any kind of sexuality, like this is you in your innocence. This is you as maybe sort of around starting school type of age. And again, what we're trying to tap into is not like what were you doing or what were you into. It's not like kind of what were your hobbies or that type of thing. It's like, what was the feeling state? Were you a child that was joyful and easeful, and does it feel light, or does it feel heavy, or does it feel dark, or does it feel a mixture? Remember, again, this capacity to hold space for a whole myriad of different things. And you might have a particular scene in mind, like I was telling you before. You know, I grew up in the woodlands in the rural southeast of England, and so for me, whenever I think about myself as a young girl, I always just see those woodlands. I see that green natural landscape. So there might be a place too. It could be a particular home or a particular location that, you know, there's a context in which this child is existing. Okay, one more piece here before we pause. The very first experiences that you had of knowing yourself as a sexual being. So nothing even close, unless it was the first time that you had sex, but probably not that. Probably that came much later. But the first times, and there'll be a few threads here, that you recall experiencing yourself as sexual. Now, that could also be not necessarily any sexual act, but just the way that other people responded to you. Like, for example, the way you were looked at or spoken to, or an awareness that you had. And what is important or relevant as far as red thread work is concerned here is whether that was before or after your first moon cycle, and before or after you felt ready. So was the timeline guided by you, or was the timeline forced upon you by external people? And again, remember here, it's very, very likely, probably in this area of sexuality more than any other area, that it's a mixed bag, right? So there'll have been, for almost every woman, some experiences of feeling uncomfortable, unsure, maybe even violated, like perpetrated against. And there will be experiences of empowerment and choice and enjoyment and pleasure. Okay. And again, I know this is like a condensed time frame. But the last piece here before we go into a sharing circle is around these different events, around these different areas. And you don't have to necessarily go through logically piece by piece. You could just do this as a kind of overall, or you can go through piece by piece. What beliefs were generated in you and what fears were generated in you? I'll write those in the chat. What beliefs were generated in you as a result of these red threads? And what fears were generated in you as a result of these red threads? Okay. And now I want you to just put your pens down. Again, those of you here live, those of you listening to the replay, just put your pens down for a moment. Gently close your eyes. Place both hands over your heart space. And we're just going up until the point where you start to emerge as a sexual being. We're not going further than that. We will, but right now we're just pausing at that point where you're kind of in your, possibly your prepubescence, possibly puberty, around that area. It's just the emerging sexuality. And as you pause for a moment with your eyes closed and you're in this sacred container, I want you to ask yourself now, quietly and sincerely, what is the story behind the stories? What is the thread behind the threads? Up until this point, what is the story behind the stories? What is the thread behind the threads? And now allow whatever comes out to come out in the journaling. I'm going to give you 5 more minutes to continue on this journaling process, and then we're going to come back to a group sharing. Just 5 minutes. Okay. One more minute just to wrap up. Okay, and then I'd just love to hear from you. I'd love to hear whatever it is in your heart that you would like to share. So there's no right way of sharing here. It doesn't have to be on a particular part of the thread or any particular focus, really just an opportunity for you to say out loud how some of the little crumbs, the breadcrumbs, are starting to connect together. And you can share as much or as little as you feel called. Trudy.
I'm happy to go first. So not much coming up around my mum's birth still. However, I do have some paperwork and things that I can kind of go in with that. My birth just popped in there that she had health things going on. And I do know that she actually wanted to have one more and she was hoping for a little girl and she got me. My mum and I were actually close, and I've kind of come to the point of realizing that her, I guess, experience as a mum was, my mum was very nurturing and very protective of us. It was more that lack of nurturing she had. So she realistically did an amazing job as a mum, and through her journey, her dad died when she was very young. The thing that came up is there was quite a strong abandonment for the females within the family from men, and men not being present. So Nen had 6 children living in very basic means when my mum was only 6 and she had 6. So the thing that I've kind of come to realize is, even with my sisters, one of the things that I am very aware of is that I struggle building relationships with women because my family, and especially women, are not a safe place for me. And it's amazing. I do work, my main work is working with women and holding space for them. So I have identified, though, how I struggle trusting women. There was like a lot of, and when I sit in and I look at that, my eldest sister, her father committed suicide, apparently. My mum was accused of killing him. They had to then go to Adelaide with my younger sister. She got left behind. So there was a lot of abandonment, a lot of rejection, and a lot around the connection with men and aggression and violence. Growing up as a child, I was exposed to domestic violence, not through my mum and dad, more so my sister. My brother-in-law was probably one of the ones that violated my sexuality. And then my sister from the perspective of hygiene. And it was interesting because she more than likely was so focused on that with me because maybe she didn't have that. So I feel, in a way, my younger sister was maybe looked at me a bit more like a child, as her child or something. So it was kind of beautiful to have that clarity coming through on that level. Yeah, so, and
isn't it amazing how, you were just saying you do so much work with women, and it's so often that we do the work that we're called to heal in ourselves as well, like because you feel that challenge sometimes around being close to women, then actually part of the healing in your red thread is that you've created work that allows you to hold safe space for women. So that's a healing thread.
Well, I continue to say to myself, Trudy, you have to step into this space for yourself, because I give myself permission to do it for others. And I'm really learning now, because I'm 53, and I'm really learning now to kind of, I guess I look at it in the way of inner child work. I'm really learning it's like to invite myself into that space. And it's like, you know, I identify nobody heals us. We can go into spaces that have that connection for us, yet it's going to be me sitting in that space with myself. And I always say, like, I live in this beautiful house with the trees around me, and I just love my me time now. And I really hold space for myself first, you know. And yeah, the things that come up, I was consistently told that my brother would call me a wombat. My sister told me that I was unattractive, fat and ugly. Yet everyone looks at my daughter and says how stunning she is, but she is literally my mini-me. So it's interesting how I see myself as unattractive. Yet I look at her and I think she's just beautiful, stunning. So that's an interesting thing. Yeah, so it's kind of like, I would say, to kind of keep it, you know, at a basic thing, it realistically, simplicity. Yeah, kind of, when I observe it, there was not a lot of presence of masculine for the women, and the women were very much then probably stepped into the masculine more than the feminine, and the feminine was not a safe space.
Yeah, there's a lot of insight in that. I feel like you've really pulled a lot of threads together there. And it will continue tomorrow, because we'll keep going with the journey tomorrow. So it'll keep unfolding. But yeah, beautiful start. Thank you, Trudy. Thank you for being so open.
Thank you.
Emma.
Yeah, I can go. I don't know much about like my actual birth and my mother's actual birth, but I really liked what you said, Katie, about kind of, yeah, like I really kind of stepped into their shoes of like, what were they feeling around that time and around being pregnant? And a parallel that I've never noticed before is that both I and my mother were born like away from our mother's homes. Like when my mom was pregnant with me, they moved far away from family, from my dad's job. And yeah, exact same with my grandmother. I don't know if she was already pregnant, but yeah, like, so for me, like this real feeling for the two of them of being like a bit untethered, like away from family and home and support, like at a time of going through such a big rite of passage for both of them. Like I'm the eldest and the first girl. My mom is the third, but the first girl in her family. And so just also kind of, just really seeing like what that, would have felt like to have the first girl, like at a time when they were feeling, probably a bit like a bit unsupported and a bit like detached from their like maternal support systems and stuff. So yeah, there was kind of a bit of a feeling of a bit of maybe like really kind of clinging and latching on to like some unhealthy habits and relationships because of feeling away from home and unsupported and not having much else, like even if it wasn't like a great relationship and a great dynamic that they had with their husband, there was a bit of like, well, what else do I have? Like I'm far away from family, and as a woman I'm supposed to be supporting him in his work and to follow his dreams. So yeah, that was a really interesting thing that came out.
Do you think that was true of both your grandmother and your mother, that thread?
Yeah, I think in different ways. Like I think, my mom would say like she in some ways, still thinks she gave up a lot to, have kids and move around the world so that my dad could have his big fancy career. So I think they both kind of sacrificed quite a bit along the way, and probably wanted that support and that, familiarity, that home, that family, but I think didn't know how to ask for it as well.
Beautiful. I feel like we'll see how that unravels, but that feels like it could be quite a strong one, because it comes through both lines. So it's a repeated pattern. So there might be some more there to dig into in the next session as well. Anything else, Emma, that you wanted to share?
No, that's probably the main one. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Sarah. Oh no, you're muted, my love.
Oh, thank you. Oh, wow. So many bits of the puzzle are landing for me. And already seeing things differently. I know nothing about my birth from my mother, and I know nothing about my grandmother, birthing my mother. So I literally just channeled, like tuned in, and not surprisingly, the feelings that came through for both my grandmother birthing my mother and my mother birthing me was this overwhelming sense of pride and joy, with this deep underlying foundation of, I have to hide this. I can't feel this. I can't show this. I can't share this. And so with my mother's birth, there's I suppose exploring there as to why my mother was the firstborn, so she was the eldest. I can see the narratives and the themes, that thread playing out in her relationship with her. She had the next born were twins, brother and sister, and
you've got twins, right?
And I've got twins, yeah. And so throughout my life, I've observed the stories there. The biggest thing coming through is my brother was 6, so my brother's 6 years older than me, and I've only got the one sibling. And this has already come through as a big part of my healing journey. But looking at this very differently, interestingly, I've always come through to that resentment piece in myself towards my brother, yet I've learnt to recognise, this 6-year-old boy has had this little baby girl enter his life. The writing's all over it for me. Intuitively, I'm like, no wonder he's so resentful towards me, and why we've had a falling out and all this stuff. Yet shifting that narrative and channeling that right now, wow, the resentment is actually coming, what I can feel is from my mother towards my brother, because she had to hide her true feelings towards me. So yeah,
that's huge. That's a huge, like, little trail of connections there. That's
here I am, just been sitting and marinating for probably years now around this resentment piece that I have towards my brother, and not seeing the correlation or the link to my mother yet. Or I can just see so much of my mother just felt simply so obligated to make my brother happy and to keep him happy. So the theme that I'm feeling coming through is this overcompensation and fabricating stories to me, to like, whilst my mother would have been feeling this deep down, what came through for me was and I was writing myself questions as I was journaling, and why though, like, where did this come from? And what came through was, I wish I had a baby girl first. I wish, if only I'd had my girl first, things would be so different. And interestingly, all I've ever heard about my birth from my mother is about my brother. And he was at school, and your father went to pick him up, and he was infatuated with this little girl called Sarah with long plaits, and that's why they called me Sarah. So that's all I've ever been told about my birth. Haven't been told.
And it might be, sometimes when it's that little information, it could be that your mum has literally just blocked it out. Like, she may not have access to anything around it, and it might not be a deliberate withholding, but she doesn't know, because it's like there's some trauma there for her that she can't get into.
And while we were journaling, guess who rang me 4 times? My mother. She's trying to ring me, and the phone was not stopping the whole time I was sitting there journaling. So I called out my daughter to go and call Nanny, just to, connect. And
you're energetically channeling her through one stream and she's actually coming
Yeah.
in through another one.
And interestingly, that's been the theme, but I see the theme in me as a parent. And I guess this is what I'm so curious to explore, like where this conviction in me comes from to change the way, because I've never known. And I guess that's something that's been my journey, is coming back to me, learning to love me, and that safety within. And that's exactly what came through when I fell pregnant was, you know, conscious parenting is the words that has always been the bubble I've created for my journey as a mother and for my daughters. And obviously not knowing that what those words meant when they would come to me, but that's the reclaiming, coming back to me. And these are exactly what I talk about with my daughters, is coming back to yourself, finding that safety within you and loving yourself and not overcompensating. And because even to this day, my mother still gives me these stories, and I look at my partner and just go, oh, do you feel that? Like how surface that is? Like it's just all so surface. And that's been what I've struggled with over the years. But I feel like I've come to this, exactly what you just said. I think she's so closed off from this. And I feel that's what's already starting to rise in me, is this peace and this acceptance that it's just not going to be possible for her. Yet I'm still going.
I came to such a similar conclusion with my mother. I mean, you heard me speak about it at the beginning of the session. And I can't tell you, Sarah, the peace, the deep peace in just letting go of any agenda I have around her being different or showing up differently in our relationship. Like when she's come previously to visit us and stay with us, there's been so many arguments and upsets and disappointments on my part, just constant disappointments. And trying to pull her into, you know, being more open, being more interested in personal development, just like trying to, and just, she's just unwilling. Like it's just, you know, she's not willing this time. And I think because of COVID, we'd had this bigger gap because she lives in the UK. So it gave me a lot more spaciousness around it. I just came in with no agenda. I came in like almost like I'm parenting her energetically, actually, was the shift. That was the paradigm shift. And it was so peaceful and so easy. And I really just feel compassion to her. And I feel just a relief. It's like putting down a heavy backpack of boulders.
Yeah.
It's just like, you know what? It's not my job to try to pull you into a journey of personal growth that you don't want to go on in this lifetime.
Yeah. That's so much of that has come to me, and that's the guidance I've been receiving over the years, and then just coming back to me and trusting.
Trusting yourself. Exactly.
Trusting me yourself and what I need to do, and COVID,
and finding another really critical part of that is finding other role models, and they might be within your family, or they might be, you know, teachers or guides that aren't in your family. Like I was talking about my teachers that I'm so blessed to have had in my life, that fulfill that role that need that you have to be parented, that can't come from your actual parent.
I think that's exactly what I feel. You said something at the start of this session, in response to me sharing earlier, that ultimately it is our journey and our work, and I think that's what landed in me about 18 months, 2 years ago, after years and years of practitioners and trainings and just so much work, and I was literally just clinging on to those, anyone and everyone who could guide me and hold me, that the last 2 years, and I think that's where the big shift and opening has occurred, because I think I've mentioned to you previously in our business training as well, that you're the first person that I've felt called to connect with, and has been a very fragile journey for me to want to connect with a mentor again, for that knowing that it is my journey, yet I'm still wanting and needing that that guidance, that support person.
We all need it. We all
yeah.
need it. It's part of the healing. It really is.
And on reflection with what you just said then too, I think I had that my whole life because my parents, that's so much of what came through was, you know, the belief systems that I formulated for myself, which came through years ago in healings, but I'd never explored further, was, you know, I made a choice at a very young age that, right, I got to do this on my own. I'm safe on my own because clearly there's no one around. There's no one here for me. They're literally not physically present. When they are, they're so focused on him and that and them that I just always found safety in myself. Yet with now recognizing creating a bit of a toxic cycle. So now the reclaiming of self and safety in myself is just, again, recreating that story of why I need that sense of safety as well. So, yeah.
Makes complete sense. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. What I want to do for our last 20 minutes together is a guided sort of relaxation / meditation process to integrate the work we've done today. And then tomorrow we will come back and continue the journey through puberty into moon cycle, birthing, and then perimenopause and beyond. So the red thread will continue. So if you are able to, you can either sit for meditation or come to lying down, whatever you prefer. Lying down is probably nicer because you can really drop into that deeper space. So I'll give you just a moment to get yourself set up for that. And if I can't see you anymore, you don't need to be on camera. It's okay. And begin by taking a couple of deep, deep breaths, just really anchoring into the physical body by means of breathing. Particular focus on the exhalation, which is the part of the breath that allows us to completely soften and let go. Two more deep, full breaths with long, slow exhalations. Bring your attention now to your womb space. And just feel into any sensations that you have in the womb space. So does it feel heavy? Does it feel light? Is there freedom? Is there restriction? Just noticing what the feeling tone is around the womb space. And then whatever feeling tone you have around the womb space right now, without suppressing or denying or subduing that experience, can you add in some compassion, some loving kindness? Can you add in some self-love? Can you add in some softening? And now bring your attention to the heart space. Feel into the energetic presence of the heart. Again, what is the feeling tone? And just allowing whatever is present to be there. Again, no judgment. Not even necessarily the need for labeling, just a softening, a releasing and accepting. And now I want you to make an energetic connection between the womb space and the heart space. Almost like a sort of energetic superhighway or channel. And you could see this visually, or you might just feel it. And that compassion and that self-love that you anchored into in the womb space, can you now find that also in the heart space? Almost as if from the womb, from the center of your feminine core, an outpouring of love and compassion is channeled up into the heart space, and then in a kind of loop feeds back down into the womb space. So we create this kind of energetic connection between heart and womb. And just sit or lie down or receive now that connection between heart and womb, and allow yourself to be in the energy of it without naming, without labeling, without trying to figure it out. We're no longer in the analytical piece. We're now just completely residing in the space of feeling. And now allow that feeling sensation to permeate wider throughout your whole body. Allowing that expansive compassion, that expansive self-trust, that expansive self-love, loving kindness to literally permeate through your whole being. Almost as if every cell in your body were being soaked up by or with this elixir of loving kindness, this elixir of compassion, support. And then bringing awareness back to your breath, back to this ever present metronome of the breath. And now place one hand on your heart space and one hand on your womb space. And with that somatic anchoring, that feeling, that touch of the hands on uterus and on heart, Feel once again the connection between the two. Feel into the softness there. And I'm going to leave you here, ladies. You can continue to rest into this quiet space for a few more minutes should you choose, or you can choose to come out of it and come up to sitting. But I'm going to allow you just to stay in this space now as I close our circle for today. I look forward to spending more time with you tomorrow. We'll end with the yogi's prayer. Loka samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy and free. May the thoughts, the words, and the actions of my own life contribute in some way to that happiness and to that freedom for all. Namaste.